Today, for the first time, we have with us a Forbes 30 Under 30 awardee, Sumit Ranka. He is the CEO and co founder of ThinkPod, a motivational merchandise brand, and also the co founder for Innovate, a co working space which was recently acquired by Oyo Rooms. So, let's dive into our conversation and know more about Sumit. We are three friends who met in college and now are working in diverse fields across the globe. Curious to know about what our friends are up to. So here we are, connecting, talking, and learning from our friends. In this podcast, we are sharing extraordinary insights from our not so ordinary friends, working in various industries, and sharing their stories and their journey so far. These are your hosts, Hiloni Panatar
Atit Kothari
and Tapan Desai.
And this is What the Hat. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss on any episodes. Sumit has been a dear friend and a mentor for me since the beginning, I believe, since college. But a lot of my entrepreneurship journey has been with constant support and motivation from Sumit. So I am extremely happy to invite you on the show.
Same for me. Like when I think about Sumit, I think of the famous Stanford speech that Steve Jobs gave in 2005. He talks about connecting the dots in that speech. Like dots are major life events that happen, which eventually shapes you personally and professionally. He said that you can only connect those dots looking back. And if I look back now, I'm certain that one such dot was given to me in my first year of engineering by Sumit. He took a chance on me and gave me this creative outlet in a very technical setting. I really think what I'm doing professionally right now is a direct result of that. So thank you, Sumit, for doing that. And thanks for talking to us today.
Anytime. I think I didn't know that I made that impact. Good, yeah. I'm happy. Someone somewhere is doing something.
Cool. So let's start from the top. Sumit, why engineering?
See, so basically, I was very adamant on doing engineering from very start. It sounds funny. It's not something that एक childhood से करना था or nothing like that sort. But yeah, I wanted to do it from a very, very long time, since the time I think I can recollect. The reason was from I guess from my childhood days, I was a big fan of automobiles, and I don't know how I ended up in electronics and telecommunication. I had ventured out to become an automobile engineer. Somewhere I know how I ended up in EXTC, but my real goal was to get into automobiles. So when I was small, I used to work on drawing cars and read about them, how do they work, etc., etc. I was working on a couple of projects on automobile, like designing a self golf cart before I got into engineering. And when the final scores came out and I started scouting for automobile offering engineering colleges, there was only one in Bombay, in Bhaikala. It was called Sabu Siddiq College, and the other was in Pune called VIT, Vishwakarma Institute of Technology. I remember there were just these two colleges which were offering a course in automobile. And with the kind of friends and everything that I had built over a period, I don't know, it was a choice that I had to make that time against friends versus the dream that I wanted to. I don't know why I ended up getting into EXTC. Not that I regret now, but yeah, it was just a coincidence I ended up in electronics and telecommunication.
Any important lessons that you learned during your college life that are still helping you? I know you did a bunch of things in college. We all were a part of it, one way or the other. But any lessons that stand out?
100%. All of these things came out together. For some reason, I don't know. I felt somewhere that college was, most of the people look at college as just education. What I feel is when we get into this senior college, basically, what do we call it? 13th in India. Yeah. So graduate college. Yeah. Sorry. So graduate college is, I believe, it's a age where you are not actually looking for knowledge. You're just looking at knowledge along with execution. Like it's not a place where you can just gain knowledge and just sit with it. It's something that you gain and you execute, you implement, or you experience it maybe at a field visit or while doing projects or something like that. And that's exactly what started happening once we started engineering. So we were we amongst my friends, we were very early in getting participations in all these college festivals, those events, managing, organizing, could it be a volunteer or a committee member or something. And that gave us a lot of exposure that normally engineers get only studies and projects exposure, and that gave us a management exposure, an exposure to manage people, to manage events. So today, when you see behind, the real lesson that we learned is even if you can build something beautiful, unless until you know how to sell it, it's of no point. And that's something that we learned the biggest there, that along with building it, we were learning how to sell it in engineering. And that's something I felt was a brilliant lesson in college.
I think I absolutely agree. For me, the foundation of marketing was college. A lot of management insights that we still use in our everyday business has been from college. So DJ was like a complete, I would say, a big internship experience where you took up all the knowledge and now like you're doing more real life execution out of that.
100%, and you are way ahead of others because, for example, we did something called as TFI. I remember I was in my third year. Hiloni and Atik were in their second year, if I'm not wrong. Correct, na?
First year.
First
First
year.
First
year.
year.
Sorry, you guys were in your first year. I was in my third year, and we came up with something called as TFI. I guess it was just a general meeting where we were asking all you guys what different can we do, and we came across two of you guys as creative people. So, and I remember Dhawal Shroff was there. He was really good with his camera, something. He was in his second year, and we thought,
Yeah.
why not do something creative with all you set of people? And we tried this video animation, video things, and everything, creative video making, etc. And they worked really well. We got really good appreciation. I remember, I don't remember what do you guys used to call it. It was something flash animation or something. There was a word that you guys
Stop motion.
flash stop motion videos, yeah. And we started
Yeah.
making those stop motion videos, and you guys, though I know it was a tedious job, you guys used to show it as if it's a very simple thing that you guys used to do. And if today you ask me, now I know Hiloni is in digital marketing, maybe how we made it is not that important. Then the importance of those stop motion videos. Now today, Hiloni, when she pitches to a client, the first thing she pitches, sir, videos are most important because people look at it and connect immediately. So we understood the importance of videos way before people were actually going forward. Like 2016 or 17 is a year when the world started moving towards more video content and less picture content. And somewhere I feel we were pretty early in recognizing that 2010, though we didn't execute something in 2010, 11 on a larger scale in the business circle, but in our self knowledge, I guess we gained decent enough knowledge on those lines.
To add to your point, I would say that other than the video part, like one important thing I learned was we coming in after college or during weekends and working things out, trying to figure out things like what will work, what won't work. That was like a real life lesson because you learn about successes and failures there and there. Because when you launch your video, like how does the crowd react to it? What do they see in it? And what did you think about it? Like all of that perspective changes a lot. So that's like that was very important as well.
100%, and you had nothing to lose back then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Pure feedback, nothing to lose. There's no one judging you. There's no grades or anything that you're under pressure or something. That environment that we got in college, I guess we were very fortunate to get that environment in college also.
The crowd that we get in DJ, everyone
Mhm.
is good in their curriculum, but they are brilliant outside of their regular coursework as well, right? So that's something that is very important, and that is part of DJ's culture.
100%, 100%. I remember I am a board advisor to the electronics and telecommunication department of our college. And in the board meeting, I remember my suggestion when sir asked Sumit if you have any inputs, they were discussing all curriculars and everything. I, frankly speaking, did not have much as a contribution when it came to curriculum, but I told them, sir, make sure that you give them decent enough time to invest on the extracurriculars because once they get out of the college, the educational content, I am pretty sure they are going to gain 100% of all that you've taught. But if they don't take anything other than that, the extracurricular part, it's something that might put them behind in the race as compared to the others who come out strong.
Yep, definitely. You said you were
Yeah.
on the educational board, so what is it? Can you like elaborate on that?
So basically, for every department has an advisor board, and the advisor board comprises of professors or industry people from different professors from visiting faculties. Like let's say a professor from IIT is a member of the board of electronics and telecommunication department in DJ Sangvi. Now that department would have two alumni, and probably the alumni have to be, let's say, 5 years, at least they passed out 5 years back or 4 years back, or I don't remember the terms exactly, but they had like two alumni, two professors from different institutes, two industry people from some different larger corporations, the college professors, the principal, and all these together, these guys decide the curriculum, the course, and everything. They submit it to the university for their approval, and these members are important. Similarly, I'm a board member at NMIMS business school, like the MBA school. So basically, we define how the course should be. We make recommendations that a subject like this should be added or should be removed. They do a discussion on it, and eventually the board decides whether they should add it or remove it. So that's something why external advisors are important, because internally you would never come to know the flaws or the new inputs, and that's when the external advisors come into picture.
Yeah, even I didn't know you could be a board member of a department inside a university. Interesting.
100%.
So
Yeah. So that's something the board decides whether they want to invite you. It's not something like we can't apply for it. It's like if the board decides to take a ex-alumni, they ask them if you would like to be a part of it. It's something like that.
right. So when did you join the board? Right out of once after you graduated, or?
No, I guess I became a part of the EXTC board in 2018, and the 2019 I became a board member at NMMS MB.
So did you approach them or they approached you for DJ?
They approached. I had no idea. Like you guys, I had no idea something like that existed.
Right. So
They
you
asked
were
me. They asked me whenever they give me a call from college for anything. They know I never deny them anything. I feel that's the best that you can do if you could be of any help back to the college. Probably whatever we didn't get in college or we missed out, I made those recommendations. Maybe the batches that come ahead get something out of it. So it's definitely, why should the others also not get what you did not get? So I used to always be part of anything that college has always called out to ask for. I've always been there.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that even when you were in the fourth year and were not officially a part of the college festival, you were definitely you were ready to give your input, reach out to your connections. That's definitely something that you've always done, in my opinion.
100%, 100%.
But I
So
think after DJ, like you had like I don't know, but for me it was very surprising that you did take up a job. I think coming from like a Marwadi background, I always thought that okay, you would be looking forward to probably joining the family business, or you would be looking at obviously like how you have started something of your own. But like why EY, and like what made you take up EY?
See, my career decisions, frankly speaking, they've never been, I don't know, I've always planned things in advance, but for some reason, for the last 30 years, nothing has ever gone as per the plan. I told you I wanted to do automobile engineering. I ended up in electronics and telecommunication. I was way strong in my mind that once I do my electronics and telecommunication, I might take up a job or something, or might go take up a job or something for a year and then go for masters to the US, either one. And then I started studying for my masters in the US, etc. Those entrance exams and everything. In the last year of engineering, I guess, is when you start studying or giving those exams, or in the end of third year or something like that. And just 2 days before my GRE, GRE was the exam. Just 2 days before my GRE, I was going to Ahmedabad because my center was there. And I just felt that what's the point of going for masters in electronics and telecommunication core field? Because after my exposure or talking to people about the industry, I realized that I don't wanted to stay back in the US. That was something that was very clear on my mind. So I was like, if I want to come back, going all the way, studying something there, and coming here and joining a company who's just going to pay me 2.5 lakhs or 3 lakhs or 4 lakhs on a very junior position. So I was like, I'm investing such a high amount of money, and I'm not going to get it back also. And I was someone, again, as you told me, I'm a Marwadi. So I used to evaluate myself. If I'm putting in, let's say, $100,000 into my cost, how am I going to get at least $100,000 back, like a break even? How would I do that? And I knew if I come back to India immediately, this I might take like 10 years to get the $100,000 back. So I decided, no, yeah, no point. Though I gave my GRE, I don't even remember if the score was decent enough or it was good. I don't think it was that good also. I didn't do my GRE. And then the placements had come. So like everyone, I was also sitting in a placement. They told me mass recruitment है placement में बैठो. I sat and coincidentally I got into EY. And frankly speaking, I had no idea what role I was taking at EY. In my opinion, I was in the financial sector. I was not into IT risk financial sector. And once I started doing my job, after 2 months, I spoke to my partner, okay, this is yeah, not. So he got pissed at me, okay, in the interview, didn't you know what you were being taken for? You? I told him, I thought I'm in the financial services sector. I wanted to go on the financial side, not on the IT risk side, auditing and everything. So
Right.
then they helped me groom it. Ki, nahi, nahi, this is what it is. It will change this, that. Then I was like, okay, okay, 2 months more I studied. I was like, okay, let's do it for a year. If I find something good, otherwise I'll make a move. And that's when 2 months I did more. And I guess I was one of the youngest analysts to quit EY. I guess I worked for like 4 months. I put in my papers. Fifth month I was out. And I didn't join my family business because my family business was a conventional trading business. And after you do engineering and all these things, you feel that you're not just going to end up into a trading business. You want to do something different. You want to try making an impact or something. So that's why I didn't want to do my trading business. So I had taken up the job. Eventually, I quit and I joined the trading business. So that's another story altogether. But yeah, that is why I left it. And my point was simple because I found the work was monotonous. It was repeating on the same thing. I had a word with all my partners or my seniors, everything, but they said they can't do anything about it because it's a hierarchy-based system where if you are at a position, you have to be there for a year or 2 years or 3 years. No one can skip a queue. And that's when I felt it's rather good to work in a smaller company than a larger corporation.
Based on your LinkedIn profile, you did something in Harvard as well, right? Like you went to the US and you did some course there, right? So like, how did you find about it, and what was the course exactly?
So after I quit EY, I joined my family business. Now, obviously, if you don't want to do something, you will look for something that is better than that, or you will look for a reason to run away. And Harvard Summer School somehow became that reason only. I worked in my family business for like 4 months or 5 months. Then I found this Harvard Summer School via a friend of mine. And what I did is, though I looked at it as a reason to just run away from the current scenario, but I took up a course that was relevant to what my family was into. We were we are a supply chain company, basically solving supplies problems for major large corporations. So I was like, why not study supply chain management in deep? And that was one of my subjects at Harvard Summer School. It was an 8 week course. It's a graduate subject, but it's like you can take up two courses, finish it over a period of 2 months, and then move to something else that you want to do, or you can go back. It's a certificate, it's a credit course to what I remember. I had a 4 credit for supply chain management and I had 4 credit for another course called e-commerce strategies. Though I didn't want to stay back in the US. So I had fellows from the Harvard Business School who were studying in summer to for those credits because I don't very well know about the credit study systems in the US, but it was something like they could finish their masters or graduate courses early if they do those summer subjects also. So I had a very good crowd working, studying with me in the Harvard Summer School. So that was one amazing experience. Also, one of my co-founder at my at the company was someone who I met there. So Harvard Summer School was a brilliant experience for me in that ways. 7 weeks, one subject, it's amazing.
Hiloni, you want
I
to add
come.
something to that? Like you did this, like you did a similar course, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I have been following Sumit's footsteps to the T, like from
Hmm.
doing college DJ and DJ festivals to like taking up EY and then eventually quitting, taking up the Harvard course within a year of graduating, and then also finding like a co-founder there. So I mean, so far, Sumit, I've just been like following you.
Also coming back and starting a company together.
Yes.
100%. I feel I feel unless until you are 30 in your, you graduate at somewhere around 21, 22, if I'm not wrong, experience everything of your list. Like, if you ever thought that you want to, let's say, be a chef, you must try doing it for 3 months. At least you won't regret not doing it. And that's something, if I go see myself in the background now, in the flashback, it's something that I tried to do as many things that I wanted to, except the automobile part. But I'm sure yet there's much time left. I would get there sometime in future. But I tried doing a job. I didn't enjoy it. So today, if I'm, let's say, not doing good in my business, I won't say it's such a job kar raha tha. I know, okay, I had done that. So you remove those lame reasons or something that you had in your list, and you just have the right set of reasons now. If you're not, you have more clarity, if there's some things that are not working, you have more clarity on why it's not working, and you won't be running away from it. You'll be more of a problem solver than running away from the problems.
I think the theory of elimination is what you're talking about here. Like, try as much as you can.
100%. That's what I'm telling you. In the pandemic, also in the last 50 days, or what's the most time that I've utilized is, I have just used the theory of elimination, as you mentioned. I'm just eliminating everything that's on my guilt list. If I was not reading enough, started reading enough. And if I didn't enjoy reading enough, at least I will not blame myself for not reading enough. I realized that I didn't enjoy reading. So at least you move to a next thing on your wish list. Haan, theek hai yaar, it's okay. If you're not reading enough, that's because you're not enjoying enough. So you're doing something else. I used to love cooking, and I'm now cooking during my pandemic. So I'm like, oh wow, I'm liking to cook. So I regret that I did not give so much time to cooking.
So do you when do you decide that, okay, like reading is not for me, I don't enjoy doing that much? Is it like after a certain period of time, or do you like, okay, I decided to read 5 books, I'm not even through the first book, and then you give up? Like, is there, or there's no system that you follow?
See, I feel there's nothing that should be, it should be an individual thing. For me, what I had done is I bought this 300 pages book. It was on Jack Ma. And I bought a book from an industry that I follow. So I was like, how Jack Ma built Alibaba, a house that Jack Ma built was the name of the book. It was a 300 pages book. What I thought is, there's 15-day lockdown. Sorry, 30 days lockdown period. I just have to read 10 pages a day. That's it, and I'll be done through the 300 pages. If I'm able to do it, I just give myself one book a month. Like, that was the best case scenario target you can set for yourself. One book in a month with nothing to do at your end. And I guess it's been 40 days now, and I'm on the 18th page. It's a clear picture that I'm not enjoying reading it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have a book called, it's on Sam Walton, the autobiography of Sam Walton. He's the founder of Walmart. And that book was, I guess, some 400 pages, and I finished that book in 5 days. So it's also a thing that maybe the way the book was written is something that I could connect more. So I could not generalize it, but I understood one thing, that on a larger scale, I'm not a book reading person. I could read a few books, but I'm not a book reading person. So I will stop judging myself, or stop being disappointed that, oh shit, yeah, I'm not reading enough. That is, I'm bad, or that is, I'm lagging. Maybe you're good at something else. So look for that. Otherwise, you need to stop judging yourself. It took me 30 years to get to that point. It's okay to, if you're not doing something the entire world is doing, it's okay. There's nothing wrong in it.
So you came back to India after the Harvard, and you started your own company.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So once I came back from Harvard, I started. For immediately as soon as I came, there was an e-commerce wave that was just picking up in India. So what I did is, the first thing I did is I came back and I just joined my dad's business, because when you have nothing to do, it's okay. Rather just spend time doing something at hand rather than wasting. That's something that my mom had told me. Until you find something of purpose enough for you to do, just do something at your dad's office or in the dad's business. So what I did is, everything that was dead stock in my warehouse, I listed them on Amazon and I started selling them. And the surprising thing was that the dead stock was sold, and my dad reordered that dead stock because it was selling so quickly on Amazon. Like, Amazon used to pay us incentives for selling those products because those products were so scarce. Even we had no idea about it. And that's how the e-commerce thing started building up for us in 2013. It started doing really well, etc. And then, see, e-commerce was a thing which the best thing about e-commerce was the shop was open 24/7. So the the real surprising part for a traditional family business which has been in the industry for like 30, 40 years is when you go home and you come back in the morning and before you answer the first call, the sales have already been done in the night. And that was really interesting for my brother, for my father to see, okay, oh wow. And you used to get payments every 7 days. You don't have to follow up with vendors and everything. That's how I started getting into the e-commerce industry. It started pulling me towards it. And while doing all these things, we were redoing our office and I found barren walls in my office. So I was like, we should decorate with some good frames, motivational frames and everything. And we started doing that. And from there, we clicked an idea to ThinkPod. So this problem was similar to me and Ritesh, both of us. Ritesh was based in Delhi, my other co-founder. So we clicked that why can't we just do it? And so that's how we started with ThinkPod, and we came up with a company that would just make motivational products and sell.
Fascinating. So actually, I had a question like if someone was to start the Amazon journey now, do you think they would get that much traction? I know like e-commerce is much bigger now than when you first started, but if a small business owner wants to sell their stuff through Amazon, do you think that's still a viable option?
Why not? Anyone who wants to do, if you think you have a product decent enough, see, my point is, the first point is that unless you try, you won't come to know. If you think whether it will sell or whether it will not sell, even if you ask Jeff Bezos himself whether that product will sell or will not sell, he's just going to tell you at least list the product on the website. If it sells, it sells. If it does not sell, it does not sell. There's no harm in listing it. You just have to list it. It's a free listing. If it sells, you make money. If it doesn't sell, it's okay. It's either way your product. It's with you. It's not even going anywhere.
I think
Right.
adding to this, I feel like probably it's the e-commerce wave 2.0 now for India as well. Seeing the current situation and people's belief in digital getting stronger, and that one medium being like, I mean, I see a lot of housewives who were so accustomed to going to like traditional kirana stores and buying their grocery to now being okay with a DMart app or a big basket app. So there is a very big shift that has happened because of this pandemic, and I think that will carry forward for years ahead.
100%, 100%. The pandemic has given a next level, like how the demonetization was for the financial companies in India is what pandemic is to the entire digital commerce industry. Post-pandemic, the digital commerce is going to pick up really well. Most of the large corporations have been spending all their period in this pandemic in building their own e-commerce portals or e-commerce websites or strengthening their core systems to support e-commerce. And that's, I guess, it also speaks about why this digital commerce is going to pick up is something answered very well by why Walmart acquired Flipkart in India, because digital commerce is the future of businesses.
I mean, more than that, the acceptability and the belief in transactions online. I think one of the biggest drawbacks of e-commerce not picking up was people being scared of doing transactions online, which now, with no option left, people have become very
Hmm.
used to. And I think the whole cash on delivery thing will also, like, that was one thing that was invented, I believe, only for India. Initially, when Amazon US, I believe, did not have it at that point of time, but like for India market and understanding the Indian ecosystem, they brought that into picture. So that thing also will kind of slow down now, and people will be very open to using digital wallets and online payments. And at the same time, I already see that like so many traditional retail stores and all of those people are looking forward to having their own e-commerce setup. And I think with the geo tying up with Facebook, there is definitely going to be a very different new wave of how commerce is going to happen across cities, even in the smallest of villages now.
Yeah, I mean, so I was talking to a friend on the call. He was in India. He was in a cab going somewhere, and when he reached there, it was like the fare was $50. He didn't have the change, so he's like, "Can you go to the nearest ATM?" The cab wala is like, "You don't have Google Pay. Just send me via
Oh
Google Pay."
wow.
That I think was a beautiful moment. That is when like I think India accepted digital payments. They know it works. No one's going to run away with your money. So that was very powerful.
I've paid so many times. I've paid a rickshaw wala in Paytm because I didn't have change and they accepted Paytm. The reason they are also accepting Paytm is because where normally earlier they used to not accept payments via digital modes because it used to stay in their wallet, used to take time to come into the bank account, everything. With digitization, these periods have become so shorter. Plus the usability, for example, when they get into a DMart store, the rickshaw like he goes to buy a grocery in a DMart store, Paytm is accepted there. So he immediately uses those funds there. Also, the convenience of someone stealing from them while they are writing it also has been taken care of. So there are a lot of pros also that are happening, and that's something that's really pushing the entire digital world ahead.
Yeah, I think I have a beautiful story here. Like this happened recently, just before the biggest lockdown that happened in Mumbai. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were in Belgaum, like she studies there, and there was
Hmm.
just this last flight to Bombay back. Like that was their only means if they had to come back to the city. Otherwise, after that, I think all borders were getting shut. And in spite of not having like any cash on hand, they just like barely like 5,000, 10,000 bucks, and they just like reached the airport. And Spicejet authorities, they just like they had their boarding passes ready, and they barely took like some amount to, and they were just like, once y'all reach back to Bombay, just make sure you e-pay it to us. And I mean, this is something that's the first time I've seen where an airlines is doing this. Like the airlines is like, okay, you pay us later, but just like, uh, I mean, people accepting it so easily, that was really fascinating. So yeah, I mean, so you had caught on the digital wave and the e-commerce wave. So I mean, how did that impact building ThinkPod for you, and how did you take it to the next level? What were your initial steps in building it, and how did you probably do the whole setup? I mean, manufacturing and warehousing, all of those things are still in an unorganized segment in India, and like navigating through them and figuring out how do you build the best effective cost effective product for your uh, audiences and for your consumers. How did you manage that whole journey?
So when we started, our core aim was that whatever product we remove, it has to be affordable, something that startups can buy. Because Ritesh and me both had a thing for startups. Once we came back from Harvard, we even invested in a couple of startups together because both of us were very inclined towards the startup community, the startup space, how these industries work. Somehow that interest also connected both of us together really well, our understanding of industries. And that's exactly what we knew our target audience was. We knew the amount they would spend and what we should deliver so that they feel that it's a justifiable amount. Now, for a startup, when you're selling them a poster for 200 bucks, it's a huge amount for a startup because they're looking at 10 posters. Normally, the posters that were available in the market were all like, if they're designed and they're well designed or they're branded, they used to be like 1,000 bucks or 1,200 bucks. And we realized these companies can't afford so much. So we came up with posters in the price of 199, 149, inclusive of free delivery to anywhere in India. These companies used to buy like 4 posters, 5 posters for their walls. Some companies who could, there was a large corporation who bought, I guess, some 30 frames on our first day. That was our first order in ThinkPod. And each frame costed them at that time something around 1,200 bucks. Now, for a corporate company with around 300 employees, spending 30,000 to decorate the entire wall space around the office was petty amount. But the impact those frames was doing was phenomenal. And that's the kind of wave that we really caught on. We realized that in that period, people have started to value their employees. They have started to understand and realize that the wall spaces in their offices are also to be seen as a real estate value, like how we calculate per square foot, how much do you end up spending? You're spending 10,000 bucks per square foot in, let's say, rent, or sorry, when you're buying it, if you're looking at renting it, you're spending 100 rupees per square feet for an office space. So we realized that why are we not utilizing the walls that are coming for free? And that's how we started building our products. Okay? Those spaces are normally just white walls, or they are images of leaders, but there are no good sayings. If there are good sayings, they are not well designed. So we focus on these problems of the corporates or the startups based on either our own experiences or via our friends. And that's how we started building these products and the minute we started doing this, the first thing that we did is, because we had got a good success via Amazon previously in my family business, we didn't restrict ourselves to just our own e-store, because when you start a new e-commerce company, not everyone trusts you so easily. Once or twice they've bought your product from somewhere, they'll have a comfort in buying from you because they're like, genuine hai. The product comes in a decent packaging or comes nicely packed. So they start building confidence. And that's exactly what we did. We had really poor sales. Like our sales on our website was like 0.5% to 99.5% when we started. And today you can say 10% of our sales, or let's say 15% of our sales, it's purely on our website. So those are the ratios that start building up. And these, once you start buying online, couple of times they come back to you on your own website, and then they start buying from your website because you're offering a huge range on your own website. It's easy to browse around from that particular brand and that product. So that's how we started building our e-commerce business. A lot of that was on the go learning, and a lot of it we learned or we created because nothing of that sort existed back then.
I completely agree. Like
Wow.
I have bought multiple motivational posters from your from ThinkPot, like to give to friends who have startups, and I was not able to find anywhere else like what you guys have in terms of designs as well as the quality of the product.
I am a loyal user of ThinkPod. In fact, the first set of stationaries and diary and everything that I created for Web Shakers, I was by Sumit. And I believe like more than anything, the quality of the product has been amazing. I think that is why, I mean, if you're a friend, I would buy it once from you because it's your company. But me being a loyal customer would only be if you retain that kind of quality throughout and across all your products. So that's one thing that you'll have managed to do so well.
So can anyone in India invest in startups, or do you have to have certain licenses or
There's nothing like that. We were angel investors. So we used to, so a couple of companies that we invested in were founded by, let's say, a friend of ours or someone we knew or someone introduced us to them. And coming back to if anyone can invest, yes, anyone can invest. It's not a very difficult thing to invest in companies, but as an angel investor, it's a lot of trust, patience, and that you need to have when you get into investing. And it's a very rare thing that people have it. Most of the people need very quick returns and everything. So that's one place why we don't see too many angel investors. The past few years, the scenario's changed.
Mhm.
We have a very good number of angel investors now.
I see. Interesting. So, like here, if you want to be an angel investor or accredited investors, you need to have certain net worth or should have certain income sources which are above a threshold. There's no regulation like that in India,
I
or
don't think there's a threshold like that or there's anything like that in the US also. I don't think it's there anywhere. If you have money, you can invest in any company. It's okay. I don't think there's any this thing. Let's say a
right?
company, let's say a company starting with $10,000 and you're offering $2,000 from your pocket. There's nothing harm in it as far as you're clear that you're just an investor, you're not a working partner.
Oh, okay. Because here, like for the accredited investor, which opens up a lot of other asset classes that you can invest in, you need to have a net worth of more than $1 million and income of more than 250,000 for last 2 years. That I know. But it might not apply to like partnerships. If you want to be like an angel investors and like with a tag, you definitely need to have those
Oh,
qualifications.
oh.
Sumit, so going back to ThinkPod, like how did you come up with the name?
So we were once we got the idea, we had actually did a test run by a different brand of ours. We had a brand called Speaking Frames, already registered with us. So we were like, let's utilize that, and we had done a test run with a lot of products with Speaking Frames. This was before ThinkPot officially coming out. We did that. Once we learned that was doing well, we decided we'll make this a full-fledged thing. But then speaking frames, we thought we would restrict ourselves to things around frames always forever. So that is why we started thinking of a better name. And we used to make a list of names every day. We used to strike off some, we used to keep them. Immediately a name used to click, we used to check if a website domain is available. If that's available, can it be? Is it a registered brand with someone else already, or can we register it? And if everything was clear, it was on a shortlisted category. But frankly speaking, we had like 10, 12 good shortlisted names fulfilling all our categories. But nothing was so powerful, or we all of us were immediately like, wow. It was always, this is good, this is good. Yeah, we can keep this, we can keep this. So we started asking people around. I was asking my family members back home, and that's when my sister-in-law, Poonam, I happened to ask her, okay, what do you think? These are the kind of names that we are thinking for this company of ours. And she's the most creative person in our family when it comes to content writing. In fact, she's the content writing head for ThinkPot. Everything around content, social media content, could it be article content, a lot of things. So we asked her, and she told us, what's the product? She asked me. So I explained her the product. It's motivation. It's something that gives you that immediate punch to just go out and do something big. If you're thinking something to execute. And that's when she told me, okay, how about ThinkPot? And I was like, why ThinkPot? It was a good name. I was like, yeah, the name sounds good, but why ThinkPot? What's it? She's like, the best things that you do or you think of are always, sorry, the best things you think of, let's keep it that way, are always when you're on the pot. That's when you're dreaming the most, or you're thinking most of the out of the box ideas when you're on the pot. And she's like, that is why I think pot. And for a second, we were like, yeah, that's funny. And we were like, yaar, it sounds weird. But then all of us are like, the words too powerful. And yes, it did make sense. And we looked for the registrations and everything was available. So we were like, let's go with this. It's the perfect thing. And that's how the name came into me.
Wow.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
So the only thing is, it took us 6 months. No, it took us 1 year almost to identify that our website was not opening in a lot of corporations and website MNCs. The reason was ThinkPot also meant something to do around drugs, and we had no idea about it. And that is why it used to block our website. It used to not open. This was when we started getting into corporate gifting, and our clients used to be like, "आपका website नहीं खुल रहा है, हमको मोबाइल पे खोलना पड़ता है, डेटा पे जाके 3G 4G पे, वाईफाई पे नहीं खुलता है, ऑफिस के कंप्यूटर पे नहीं खुलता है." And we asked them, just send us an error, and the error used to come, drug and sexual content abusive or something like that error. That is why it has been blocked. Contact administrator. And it took us around 3 to 6 months to get it filtered out from Symantec, Norton. We had to write to these companies to get our website whitelisted. And yeah, now it's complete. So we eventually got a tagline for our company: "Get high on motivation," connecting to things.
Oh, well done. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, Sumit, getting into like the whole, I mean, your journey is, and the name finding is amazing and it is hilarious. But yeah, what we know about a lot of e-commerce businesses, and there are like these set of things that people talk about, that e-commerce businesses in their first 4 years or first 2 years do not make any profits. And they are just to like build an audience, cater an audience, get a lifetime value of a customer, and then look at making profit. So, was that something that you always, I mean, were aware of, or was that the kind of journey that you embarked on, or did you have like a different story?
So when we started now, we never had any experience of starting up. We had no investors other than ourselves. So we had no one guiding us how to do, whether this is the right thing or wrong thing. See, e-commerce being a new industry, that back then, the e-commerce companies that you could think of was Amazon, Flipkart, and they were too large for us to even compare ourselves to it. And both of us being part of our conventional family businesses, we knew one thing: how much did you buy it for? How much did you sell it for? How much is left with you? Are you able to sustain in with what is left? If yes, that's a company, you're doing some business. If no, you're doing something wrong and you need to figure it out. That was our pure protocol from the start. That is why, for some reason, I feel we are one of the slowest growing companies in our eyes. We see it when it comes to, let's say, numbers or something, but we were one of the only profitable companies amongst our competition. There were many companies that propped up during our time with, let's say, technology or with heavy marketing spends, etc. But most of them shut down by the period of 2 years or 3 years in being when they were not able to raise more funds or something. And expenses are something that you can very easily increase, but you can't reduce them as soon as the expenses start, as soon as the incoming funds stop slowing down. So that's one reason why we were like, it took us 2 years to stay operationally profitable. And so first year we made a few losses, but our losses were not money gone off. It's something, let's say we bought a few racks for our warehouse. So the money is with us. It's just in the form of an object lying in our office. We bought new laptop. We bought a new license. The license is actually going to take a period of 5 years. But in this year, you're seeing that as a loss. It took us 2 years to get over it. Third year onwards, we were profitable. And fortunately, we never had to go the negative way after that ever. And I feel that's the actual way of doing business. You ask anyone who's done business for years, they'll talk about profits.
But then what is your take on all these businesses which are working on highly funded, uh, majorly the highly funded startups with marketing spends and acquisition? Like a lot of these businesses which were like first in its time had to also educate their customers and spend on that before they even got into like the purchase model, be it like Paytm. I believe that when they came into picture, they had to have a very massive education drive before they even started onboarding people, and then they got into a segment where they went into like having X amount of transactions on their portal and now becoming one of the India's biggest payment gateways or payment wallets. So what is your take on initially investing and going big, creating a market for yourself, and then in the long term seeing the benefits out of it? Or is it more towards this route where you balance your income versus your expense and then navigate through it in that manner?
I don't think there's any way that one needs to choose. It's a different model completely. I would say what your business requires, what you think you can do, it's based on that. Today, for example, there was a company who wanted to invest in our company ThinkPod, and their reason for investment was they were like, we want you to go the retail way, we want you to start opening stores. And they gave us projections. Let's say you open 10 stores in a year, then 20 in the another year, and etc. 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 And it just didn't click us because, let's say, the amount of funding that they were going to put in would help us open 12 stores, not sustain the 12 stores. It'll help us open 12 stores, but we'll again have to start looking for more investors or something to keep opening stores. And our way of doing business was, if the 12 stores are not giving us profit enough, we are not opening more stores. So it was a different kind of approach. Both are right. Some people say you need to scale up too big first and then start recorrecting anything that you've not done right during the way. Some people say we'll do it slowly, but we'll do the correct way throughout. So it's a choice that people make. Now, another part comes in when you say, let's say a company like Paytm, you gave me an example. They went the funding way. Was it the right way or the wrong way? So I would say for products like those, they were making a financial technology product. And sometimes products like those take years to build. Let's say they took, I believe they had started sometime in 2003, 2011 is when they ventured into Paytm e-commerce. And in 2014, they ventured into the Paytm payment segment, or 2015. I'm not very sure on the year they ventured into the Paytm uh, payment gateway and the payment model. But 2011 was when they ventured into the e-commerce market. They ventured into the e-commerce category. 2011 or 12 was because Flipkart, Snapdeal, these guys was really scaling up in that period, and that was a industry where you used to go to any investor and they would be like, "Oh, you're in e-commerce, we are ready to invest in you." And there were many portals that came up back then. Many shut down. Some lucky ones or the right ones could stay. There was a company called ShopClues. I don't see them today. Maybe they exist, but they didn't become as large as the others like Flipkart and Amazon stayed. I don't hear about Snapdeal anymore. I don't hear about ShopClues anymore. I don't hear about Paytm Marketplace, or there was something called Paytm Market or Paytm e-commerce. I don't hear about them. But some companies ventured into a different portal, like Paytm ventured into the payment segments, and they are doing absolutely great work there. It took them 5 years to build that kind of technology, and that is why they need the kind of funding they need. They were very clear. Maybe when they pitched to the investors very well know that they would take 3 to 5 years to build the product, 7 to 8 years to get to break even, and that's their investors have done the kind of calculations. So it's a different model, a founder's approach, what you want to do, what you think is right for your business. There's no right or wrong in it, I guess.
That makes it, and it sounds very similar to what happened in the US in the 98 2000 time frame when there was this dot-com bubble and all the different websites were coming in, and people, if they heard that it is a dot-com company, then they would just go in and invest in them. So I think it's very similar to what happened. So like what I want to ask you, like what leads to those companies failing? Like why weren't they able to expand further? Was it because their investors pulled out because they were not showing profitability, or they were not moving or adapting quick enough?
Sometimes when you have too much of funds also, you lose the real direction why you started. That's something that I have noticed. Most of the companies fail because the core vision why the company was founded gets lost while scaling up or while building the company on the way. And sometimes they realize it's not the right thing. They tried their best and they shut it down because it didn't work well. So there are multiple reasons why these companies fail. When funds definitely are a reason why these companies fail. I believe Flipkart, Snapdeal, both of them were valued at phenomenal figures. One of them failed because the other guy was supported or funded really well by larger corporations or had a continuous supply of funds. So when it came the war of prices, Snapdeal couldn't put a good fight to Flipkart and they lost in the way. And Amazon came from somewhere else, and Flipkart and Amazon became the new competitors, and all the others were left behind in the market. So it's also luck. There's no particular reason. It's just, I feel, and also one of the reason was Snapdeal was a coupons website which eventually get into market, into e-commerce. They were really good when it came to e-commerce also, but they had a very okay UI. They did not have a good customer service. Whereas Amazon came in, they were heads up on their customer service. That's how Amazon was able to sustain and make an entry into the Indian market. Flipkart upped their game with customer service, again was able to, and the others stayed back. So there are multiple reasons why a company sustains, but definitely if you build it slowly and steadily, you won't need to do a lot of corrections on the way.
Makes sense. And you talked about core mission. So like what is the core mission for ThinkPod?
So when we founded ThinkPod, our core mission was one thing simple, that in fact, our first tagline was, our vision is to ensure you don't lose yours. That is our mission statement. That was our vision statement. And our vision is that we ensure you don't lose yours. Our idea was just to have a product. If you're thinking something in the morning, there's just a positive message, do something awesome today, written on a mug. And you're you're just drinking a coffee from your coffee mug, and it says, do something awesome today. It gives you a smile, or it gives you that additional push. When you're alone, there's no one to talk to. The mug speaks to you. It's a thought chosen by you for yourself. It keeps reminding you of your goals or your thoughts. And that's something we thought, the young millennials, that we are the largest population in the youth segment is what we were. I don't remember the exact stats, but when we started, it was something like 40% of the country is in the age band of 20 to 35. And we figured out that people in these age groups want everything fast. They're not very patient. They need quick results and everything. And that is why a lot of people end up in depression, or they end up losing their core goals of what they are doing. They start losing their path. That's why we thought these products would do those kind of work for them. They'll give them those additional push. And there were many testimonials around these that customers gave us, which keep giving us the kind of boost to stay alive. They used to tell us that this really helped them. So that gave us the kind of motivation to stay alive, to keep doing what we are doing.
So that's it, folks. This is the end of part 1. We'll be continuing Sumit Ranka's journey in part 2 of this episode. We'll be discussing his startup named Innovate, which was a co-working space in India, later got incubated in Y Combinator in San Francisco, and finally got acquired by Oyo Rooms. We will be also talking about Sumit being recognized in Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia and continuing with our segments. You can find more about Sumit in the show notes below. Thank you for listening in. Like and subscribe if you haven't done that already. That would help us a lot. You can even rate this episode on the streaming service of your choice. You can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or our website. We would love to hear from you. This is Heloni, Atit, and Tapan signing off, and this was What We Had.